Here's an idea. Taylor Swift gets her power from writing. There have been subtle hints throughout Idea Channel, but I think it's time to be totally honest. I love Taylor Swift. There, I said it. And clearly I'm not alone. The critical response to Swift has only ever been great, but it's becoming monumental alongside her power over the music industrial complex. 1989 is slated to become the only record to go platinum in 2014. She removed her entire catalog from Spotify because she doesn't feel the streaming service values music properly. She's on the cover of Time. Business Week decreed Taylor Swift is the music industry, and remember that time she gave $90 to a fan just for burritos? Taylor Swift, megastar, friend of the people, celebrity cat haver. It's easy to say that Taylor's influence is derived from her effortlessly catchy pop music backed by a quadrillion-dollar marketing budget, but hey, let's shelve the cynicism for a minute and ask if there might be something more. Like, part of me wonders if Taylor is so powerful because she writes her own music, or more than music, she writes her own life in a way that's distinct from other pop stars, or at the very least, other female pop stars. And again, we can cynicize this 6 ways from Sunday and say, no, there is no way any of that "aw, shucks" nonsense is true. She is as constructed as any other celebrity. But what if we treat this a little bit like the Taylor Swift version of Pascal's wager and ask, what are the consequences if we assume there is no grand Swiftian architect? Well, so for the most part, as Taylor says in Time magazine, we don't usually ask if male pop stars write their own music. It's absurd to ask if Pharrell, Metallica, or Ed Sheeran, which is the example that Taylor provides, write their own music. But by comparison, it's often assumed that female pop stars don't. For a lot of people, it's surprising to learn that Taylor, Nicki Minaj, or Lorde actually write their own music. Or it's weirdly unsurprising to learn that the Spice Girls or Rihanna don't. Taylor talks about the perception that for women, quote, it's somehow unacceptable to write songs about your real emotions, that it somehow makes you irrational and over-emotional. The implication being that in some way, writing, maybe writing popular songs especially, is a thing that you need a dude around in order to do, or to do correctly and successfully. Taylor does work with male producers, most famously Max Martin, who's responsible for co-writing and producing more hit pop songs than there are Grammys in Quincy Jones's Grammy cupboard, but is blank space Max's? I would say no. Clearly and famously, Taylor writes about Taylor with authority, and it's through that writing that she publicly discovers and creates herself. And as it so happens, poet, playwright, philosopher, and writer Ellen Sixou has some stuff to say on this very subject. Not about Taylor Swift specifically, but about bodies, both of flesh and of text, and what it means to have a female version of the former while writing the latter. In her 1975 essay, The Laugh of the Medusa, Sixou writes that many women, herself included, might avoid writing because it is, quote, at once too high, too great for you. It is reserved for the great, that is, great men. And it's silly. Sixou says that for women to write woman, that is to wrestle with the limitations of communication and write of women in an honest and unrestrained way, is something of a radical and important act, because it's through this kind of writing that women can explore and create their identity or physicality. An identity separate, most likely, from what is expected and assumed of them. An identity that is at once personal but also in relationship to that of all other women. And so they invite other women to do the same. Sixou writes that the woman writing woman begins a new history, that, quote, woman unthinks the unifying, regulating history that homogenizes and channels forces, herding contradictions into a single battlefield. Looking at the struggles of women all over the world, it might be a bit overblown to say that Swift's feminism has reached battlefield status. But whatever her power as a pop icon in Western culture is worth, I can't help but wonder if what Sixou describes is somehow at the center of it. Meaning, if we buy into the mythology of Swift, she is who she is. That she presents herself the way she does because that's who she wants to be. Not what a manager or publicist or top secret cadre of sorcerers for whom she is some source of power or influence want her to be. It's tempting to contrast Taylor and Britney Spears, who ended up shaving her head because there was so much primping and polishing that she couldn't take it anymore. For Spears, her hair became a symbol of this terrible process that had to take place so that she could be she herself. It had to go. It's tempting also to compare Taylor with Lady Gaga or Madonna, two pop stars also seemingly in control of their image, but much more performative and frenetic in the practice of that control. It's tempting, and perhaps most appropriate, to compare Taylor with Nicki Minaj or Beyonce, two other people who seemingly have consistent and strong control over the set of things that we, as audience, identify as contributing to their selves. And finally, it's tempting to call Taylor's and maybe Nicki's and maybe Beyonce's thing authenticity, to say that they are authentically who they appear to be, but I think it might be something different. Authenticity suggests that someone really is who they seem to be, in some vague, deeply personal sense, but for almost all of us, we're never gonna know who Taylor really is. Heck, I don't even know that I know who I really am, though I have been reading a lot of existential philosophy lately. Ocean look. Our image of Taylor Swift is like a cubist portrait, many bits from many different perspectives, all adding up to make one complete image. And that image, authentic or not, seems purposefully managed, written, if you will allow, by Swift herself. That image is powerful because it's charming. Sure, there has been no shortage of ink spilled on Taylor's "aw shucks, I'm just a simple country mega pop star" demeanor. But I think also because she displays clear ownership of it and confidence in it. That can be powerful, and as long as we're inhabiting the super palatable zone of popular culture, even a little bit radical. Cixu also wrote about confronting the various struggles, class and otherwise, inherent in pushing against this regulating history, and one really only need listen to the first verse of Welcome to New York to realize that class struggle is maybe the furthest thing from Taylor's mind. Cixu says that even the work of most female writers, quote, obscures women or reproduces classical representations of women as sensitive, intuitive, dreamy, etc. In other words, instead of violently pushing forwards, they reflexively or preciously hold on to the past. They avoid the bodily, the truly personal, and rely on the familiar stories, familiar uses of language. She says lots of this writing is run by the libidinal or sexual and political economy, and whoa, it is so easy to see Taylor in this light. Sensitive, intuitive, dreamy, and increasingly part of the libidinal economy. But are we maybe being cynical again? And here it becomes difficult for me, as a dude, to weigh in with any authority. So it's more appropriate, I think, for me to pose this last thought as a question. If we do assume that Taylor is writing her way through her own life, that her lyrics and her image are her choices, is her success, her control over her own image, somehow less meaningful or less radical if she is reproducing elements of a classic representation of women? Or, as far as these criticisms go, is it better to just shake them off? Let us know in the comments, and welcome to Idea Channel. It's been waiting for you to subscribe. It takes a lot to make a stew of comments. Let's see what you guys had to say about Too Many Cooks. First things first, next week's Idea Channel episode is going to be about Over the Garden Wall, so if you haven't seen that, you should. And I was on the Thanksgiving episode of Grace Helbig's podcast, Not Too Deep, in which I do things that are both embarrassing and disgusting. Links to both of those things in the doobly-doo. And finally, before we get talking about Too Many Cooks, there was a question from the Q&A video that we ended up cutting because I didn't like my answer, but it's a really good question and one that I want to answer, so I'm going to answer it now. Captain Nightmare asked whether or not there were any topics that we've covered on Idea Channel where after we've made the video, I've changed my mind. This is a really hard question to answer because as we continue to make Idea Channel, my understanding of the world and culture continues to change and become more complex. So really there's no shortage of things that I look back on and think like, oh, we could have done that better. We could have provided better context. I left out this hugely important detail. So from that perspective, there is no shortage of things that I look back on and have sort of changed my mind about. But you know, insofar as the point of Idea Channel is to ask a question and then see what happens as you try to answer it, I look back on our episodes and I haven't changed my mind about the utility of having asked any of the questions that we've asked. I think they've all repaid asking and have been interesting to try to answer. So I disagree with myself or have changed my mind about a lot of details, but as far as the way that we have approached most things, yeah, still on board. Notable exceptions being ones where I'm perfectly honest about it, like the trolling episode. But yeah, this was a really great question, Captain Nightmare. Thank you for asking it, and I'm sorry that it took me an extra week to figure out an answer. And finally, we arrive at comment responses for Too Many Cooks. I ruffled a surprising number of feathers by pronouncing it May May. I thought I was just making a silly joke. Some people got actually mad. You guys, I used to work for Know Your Meme. I know how to pronounce it. It's pronounced May. Brandon MacDeichtine, whose last name I'm butchering, I'm sure, so Brandon, I'm very sorry, writes a really great comment about how, even though you could argue that Too Many Cooks posits the meaninglessness of life, actually trying to find meaning in the video itself is kind of a counterpoint to that meaninglessness, that you create meaning out of a thing attempting to communicate meaninglessness, and that if it was perfectly absurd or meaningless, wouldn't it be an example of Wittgenstein's whereof one cannot speak? This was a great set of comments. Links to this one and the rest in the doobly-doo. Thank you for writing this, Brandon. In No Way Related To from the Idea Channel subreddit talks about how you can also read Too Many Cooks as a response to the suffocating and intense production environment that exists around television, and that when you have too many production cooks, you end up getting just nonsense. And I think this is a really great and interesting read. I'd never heard of this before. Flips Physics very accurately points out some phrasing problems, and I want to say that I recognize that there are lots of people who find meaning in the world, and that the world is itself not inherently meaningless. Here I come to save the day! There are so many more awesome comments that we couldn't get to because I wanted to answer Captain Nightmare's question from last week, so there are links to more Too Many Cooks comments in the doobly-doo, next to links for our Facebook, IRC, and subreddit. This week's episode was brought to you by the hard work of these celebrity cat havers, and the tweet of the week comes from Hollow Earths, who points us towards a robot making minimalist artwork. It's rad.